everyone and welcome back. Now, as you may have seen from my most recent vlogs, I have recently got back from an Arvia cruise. Now my sailing was around the Mediterranean, but in today's video I'm going to be talking you through all the dining that we had and giving you a full review when it comes to food, service and atmosphere. So whether you're going away on a Mediterranean cruise or you're maybe off on a winter Caribbean cruise on Arvia, then this is the video for you so that you can get a proper lowdown on what to expect from each of the dining locations. So as I said, I'm going to be talking you through the food, service and atmosphere that we personally experienced on our summer sailing around the Mediterranean whilst on Arvia. So this is very much our personal experiences. However, we did get chatting to lots of people on board and we found that our experiences were fairly similar to others. So hopefully you'll find that this is a fairly reliable review when it comes to the dining. Now I'm going to leave chapter marks below, so if there is a specific restaurant you want to skip right ahead to, then you can. But otherwise, grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get chatting all things food. The first two dining locations I'm going to be talking about are both included as part of your package on Arvia. So the first I'm going to talk about is Olive Grove. We dined at Olive Grove on our first night and we loved it so much that we actually went back a second time in week 1 and a third time in week 2. So we dined quite a few times at Olive Grove. I will say that the first night was by far the best experience, particularly when it came to the service. In fact, the service that we had that first night in Olive Grove was second to none. It was possibly even the best service we had for the entirety of our cruise. The servers, they were so attentive to us. There was a point where my fiance quickly went to the loo, and in that time our starters came out, and what our waiter did was he put a cloche over my fiance's food so that it didn't go cold. And just little things like that make such a difference. Recommending food for you to try, encouraging you to have like maybe more than one pudding, stuff like that, I think personally is really great service. The food came out relatively quickly. Things like drinks were out straight away before your starter. This was a rarity on the cruise, so my tip would be to always take a drink in with you to your restaurant, because quite often we found your drinks didn't come out until your main course did, so you went your whole starter without anything to drink. So that would be my personal advice there. So if I was ranking on just our first night in Olive Grove alone, I would say one of the best restaurants on board. It went downhill from there. Now don't get me wrong, the food was good. Was it mind-blowing? No, it was very tasty. But when you compared it to the food of the restaurants where you pay a little extra, you can see why those restaurants you pay a little extra for. Now does this make the food at Olive Grove bad? Absolutely not. It's just not as good as the stuff you pay a little extra for. Now we were very lucky, we had lots of onboard spend. So it meant that we got to experience a lot of these for a little extra dining experiences. However, please don't feel you're missing out if you just want to stick to the main dining rooms. But I would encourage you to really make use of Olive Grove at the start of your trip. And I think part of the reason for this is because people don't realise that Olive Grove is an MDR, so a main dining room. So you can see on the app that places like Zenith are absolutely booked out, and it's a queue of like 80, and it's going to take a little while for you to get your table. Whereas Olive Grove, it was like 3 or 4 people on that first night because people didn't realise that that was one of the included restaurants. So I would say make sure you go. It's got great decor. It's kind of Grecian, Italian tables. There are quite a lot of tables which are obviously close together. You're on a cruise ship, it happens, but I felt that they'd been really well arranged so you didn't feel like you were all crammed together in a very small room. It was nice and open, it was nice and light, gorgeous views of the sunset. So as I said, we went 3 times, so overall it was a thumbs up from us. Next up is 6th Street Diner. Now again, this is included as part of your package with Arvia. You do not have to pay anything to dine here. We only had brunch at 6th Street Diner, and I'm going to be honest, it was the weakest of all the places we ate. In terms of atmosphere, amazing. The theming in that restaurant was superb. You're in a proper American style diner. We were unfortunate with where our table's located. If you're walking through the corridor where you've got the Olive Grove and you've got 6th Street Diner off of this corridor, there are some windows that look directly into Sixth Street Diner, and there are tables right in these windows. If you are seated at one of these tables, I would encourage you to ask if there are any other tables available, because you do very much feel like you're in a fishbowl. People walk past the window, and I kid you not, they're as close to you as my hand is to my face right now, and they are staring at you and they're staring at your food. So look, if this doesn't bother you, then that table for you is fine, but I would suggest maybe asking for another table. That would just be my one little tip. But as I said, the overall atmosphere of this restaurant was so cool. The food and the service was what let it down. Now, the problem with this restaurant was it was understaffed. It's not that what the staff were doing was bad, it wasn't that they were discourteous or anything like that. There just weren't enough people, and they were struggling to get everything done. So the food came out. I had chicken and waffles, and my fiance had a beef brisket. All of it was delicious, it was just cold. And when my chicken and waffles came out, I knew I was going to need more syrup. It wasn't that he didn't give me enough, it's just I like a lot of syrup when I have something like chicken and waffles. So I asked for the extra syrup, and it took about half an hour for a little dish of syrup to come out. It is what it is, they're understaffed, but for that reason we didn't return to Sixth Street Diner, because we just didn't feel it was as nice an experience as the other places that there were to dine on the ship. And as I said, we spoke to fellow guests, and generally the consensus was that the service was slow through no fault of their own, and also the food was ultimately cold. Okay, moving on to Epicurean. Now this is one of the more fine dining experiences, and you do have to pay a little extra. If you book in advance, you do get a slightly cheaper deal than if you were to book while on board. I would also say this is probably the most expensive restaurant that you can dine at on the ship, so we saved this one for one of the formal nights. Now, as a restaurant, it's beautiful. You've got windows surrounding you almost on all sides, so it's so light, it's airy, it's spacious. The tables aren't crammed next to each other. It's all white tablecloths. It's beautiful. Really, really lovely formal dining setting. So if maybe that's not the kind of thing you're after, this isn't the restaurant for you. The food was exceptional. I cannot fault the food at Epicurean. It is absolutely delicious. I've dined in Epicurean on the Azura as well. So consistent between both the ships. The menu was the same, the food was equally as delicious. It was fantastic. Now, I do think we were unlucky with our experience here, but we did not have great service. I think we were unfortunate, and I think our table just got forgotten about, and you know, just orders were forgotten to be taken. We were asked for our order at one point, and we hadn't even been given the menus, and then it took another 15 minutes or so for the menus to come out. I am gonna just be really clear though, I think we were just unlucky, because again, we had friends who dined here and they had the best experience ever. So I don't want to criticize Epicurean for that, because I just think it was our personal experience. So as I said, this is a really special dining experience. So I would encourage you to maybe think about a special day or a formal night, or maybe you're celebrating a birthday or an anniversary. This is the restaurant to go for that. But the food, just phenomenal, exquisite, so beautifully presented. You get little extras like chocolate with your tea and coffee at the end. It's just a really special occasion and a wonderful place to dine. Right, next up is Glass House. Now, Glass House and Keel and Cow are both located in the atrium. I personally loved this. You really felt like you were still kind of, whilst you were separate, you were still in the hubbub of the centre of the ship and everything that was going on. Arvia is known for its performances, so depending on the night, there's quite often an aerialist performance going on in the atrium, in the stairwell, and you can see this from your seats in Glass House and Keel and Cow. So for that reason, I personally loved it. I can see that for some people, because it's not a separate dining area, a separate room altogether, it could maybe feel a bit too loud. You might not feel like you're in a proper restaurant per se, but this is all just personal opinion. For me, I personally loved the setup of both Keel and Cow and Glass House. As I said, you're in the atrium, and as a result, you've also got the windows on both sides of the ship. And so regardless of which way the ship's sailing, you're gonna get that sunset, and it is beautiful. It's floor to ceiling windows, and it is just a stunning, stunning view. And one of the nights when we dined in Glass House, we dined there twice. One of the nights we were there, it was just the most glorious sunset, and we were right on the edge of the mezzanine. It was beautiful, absolutely amazing. Food at Glass House was fantastic. fantastic. It was a kind of tapasy style of dining. So in the starters, there were many little tapas you could choose from, and you could choose individually, or if you combined it into a trio, you'd get it on a slight deal. We tried a wide variety of the tapas. All of them were exquisite, really good size as well. Sometimes I find with tapas, it's very, very small. You got a good size portion. So much so that the first night we went, we had tapas for our starter, and then for your mains, you get to choose from a trio plates, 3 types of like chicken on your plate or 3 types of fish on your plate, for example. The tapas was so generous on the first night. We naively went in, had tapas for starter, 3 plates each, and then we had a trio. I could not finish my food. There was so much. So when we went back a second time, we just had the tapas and then we had cheese to finish, and that was more than enough for us. Now, again, each to their own. You might find tapas and the trio great for you, but for me personally, it was a bit too much. But everything was so delicious, so divine. I had the chicken trio, it was wonderful, and the service there was fantastic. The service there was so friendly, happy to make recommendations. They were really fun as well, which I think does add to your dining experience. So moving upstairs to Keel and Cow, in terms of atmosphere, everything that I've said for Glasshouse kind of applies because it's just a floor higher. So the sunset, the ambiance, the performance, you get all of that at Keel and Cow as well. Now, what I found interesting at Keel and Cow, we dined here twice. On both the occasions, we were warned that it would be a 45-minute wait for your food, which does not faze us. We are people that really like to sit and take our time with our dining, and you know, we don't like to feel rushed. So actually having that length of time to just sit and enjoy each other's company is wonderful. I would say that the service across all the restaurants was about that speed. You'd wait about 40 minutes or so for your food. So it surprised me that Keel and Cow was the only location that talked about that. So I don't know why they did that. I don't know if that was just that they'd had complaints, people felt it was slow. I really don't know, but as I said, we didn't mind waiting that length of time. The food was divine. Huge portions, but again, the service were fantastic because they'd always warn you when something was going to be on the larger side. So for example, the spatchcock chicken, well, it didn't say it was a sharer, but you got an entire chicken. I mean, I guess it also clues in the name, spatchcock chicken rather than half chicken. But anyway, they did pre-warn you that that was what was going to be coming out. So I felt, again, that they were being really honest and upfront with you, and they weren't trying to like get you to buy something bigger and spend more money, if that makes sense. So I had a spatchcock chicken one night, could not finish it, but my goodness, was it delicious. I was picking at that skin. I was like, I don't want to not finish it, but it was so delicious. And then the steak was just cooked to perfection the second night we went. I'm a very fussy person when it comes to steak, and I felt that they had cooked it exactly how I'd asked. So you can't really ask more than that, can you? So yeah, it's a gastropub, does what it says on the tin, and it was really tasty, and it's where we chose to go on our final night. So I don't think you can give much higher praise than that, really. Moving on to Green and Co. We enjoyed this restaurant so much we went back a second time. Now again, what was interesting about Green and Co is that its popularity grew as the cruise went on, a bit like Olive Grove did. So the first time we went, I think it was the second night on the cruise, and there was no one in there. There were 3 tables the whole evening. There were 3 tables, but that meant that the service was second to none. They got to know us, they got to know our names, they explained the entire menu to us. It was fantastic. Now, I would really recommend that you go to this place because it was just delicious. I had the beef, obviously not beef, I had the chakalaka Wellington on the first night, and I had the chili nachos on the second. It was just, the flavors were superb. And what we did for our starter was we shared the Mediterranean medley. Now the Mediterranean medley you could have, and there was a couple of dishes like this, you could have it as for yourself as your main, or you could share it as a starter. Personally, I would recommend that you have something like this as a sharer starter because there was 2 of everything. So it's perfect for 2 people. Personally, I think it might have got a bit repetitive for me if I'd had all of that to myself as a main. But yeah, they also serve sushi. Mitsuana is within Green and Co. So if you want sushi, that's also available. But what I will make a point of is how stunning this restaurant was. It had beautiful colors, like bronze and bright colors, and it was just gorgeous. But the service here when we went back for our second dining, they remembered us and they welcomed us in and they called us by our names and they gave us a great table the second night, and they were like, do you need the menu explained? We're like, no, like, because we'd already been, but they would have happily gone through all of that with us again. So I was so impressed at how they remembered us as well, and they just made you feel really special. So again, Keel and Cow, just go. It was delicious and really not that bad for value as well. Really good value, and not too expensive, hence why it's good value. Final two, we're gonna have Sindhu and then we're gonna have Glasshouse. So Sindhu is a kind of Indian fusion restaurant. I really enjoyed this. I would say if you're going for your traditional curry, this is maybe not the restaurant for you. I mean, there isn't really anywhere on board unless you go to the buffet during like the nights where they serve curry, but it's more Indian fusion, Indian inspired. So I did have a curry, and it came with noodles. I've never had noodles with a curry before, and you know what? I loved it. Ryan, my fiance, he had a Sindhu signature plate. So it was kind of, it was meats and lobster and all sorts. It didn't come with a sauce per se, but it was still delicious. Just as it was kind of, a different take on Indian cuisine, and it was just, everything was exceptional. And again, the service here was really, really strong. And in terms of the atmosphere, really great. It's much bigger than you think. When you're walking through Deck 8, you just leave the atrium and you're walking towards Sindhu. It looks like it's quite a small restaurant, but what it does is it goes right into the center of the ship and it goes round the corner, and it's just humongous. But I would actually say this restaurant was probably the best in terms of spacing. Tables were really far apart from each other, and they had really large tables and they had tables for two. There was a bit of everything, and they'd used partitioning as well. So despite the restaurant being huge, they'd managed to partition it so that it didn't feel like just one massive empty room. So I felt that that had been styled out really well. I would say Sindhu is on the pricier side when it comes to the a little extra dining. It was definitely worth it. For us, because of the pricing and because it was a little bit more, we saved it for our second formal night and we loved it. And it was a restaurant on one of the formal nights where you could go informal, or you didn't have to, you could go more casual if you wanted to, but most people in there were dressed up, and so you didn't feel out of place, and it was just a really nice dining experience. Right, to finish off, Beach House. This was my absolute favorite meal of the whole trip, and I am so glad we booked it. We dined at Beach House on the Azura back in February, and it was not a great dining experience at all. So we very nearly didn't even book it on Arvia, but we thought, let's give it a go, let's try it. We would have missed out on so much. So I'm going to start you off with the atmosphere. Again, a bit like Sindhu, it's all kind of been partitioned off. It's a big restaurant, it's been partitioned off, and interestingly, it's an open kitchen, so it's really fun and interesting to watch what's going on in there because you can see everything because it's open. And don't do what my fiance did where you accidentally walk through the kitchen, but that's another story. Now, we were exceptionally lucky with our table. We were sat right by the window, so we got this most beautiful sunset, and it's right up at the top of the ship. I think it's deck 16, so looking down at the sea below you, it was just incredible. The service was just, I've talked about the service being really strong. So bar 6th Street Diner, generally, yes, the service is great, but it was just a bit like the service we had in Olive Grove on our first night. We were getting recommendations for food, we were being encouraged to have more than one starter, things like that, because we were like, oh, can't choose between these two, and they're like, have both, do it. And funnily enough, when we were at Beach House on Azura, they were very strict about you only having one of each course. So we actually had 2 starters each. We thought we were going to have a starter and a half and just share one, but they brought out 2 for each of us. And the food was just wonderful. Again, it just does what it says on the tin, but it comes out just so tasty. We both had the steak, which came at an extra cost. So you do have to pay to dine at Beach House. I think it's £10 per person, but we bought it in advance, so it was £7 per person, and then it was another £7 to have the steak. So the meal cost £14 in short, but it was served on a hot stone, so you got to cook it to whatever you wanted. It came with prawns as well. There was so much food, and then the puddings were equally as delicious. I wish I'd gone for the same thing as Brian. It was a chocolate mousse, but because it said it had coconut on it, I thought, oh, I might not like it. It only had coconut shavings. I'd have been fine. I wish I'd gone for it. I had the apple pie, which was very nice, but it was not as good as that chocolate mousse. So if you like chocolate, it's a chocolate lover's dream, because it was just bellissimo. But yeah, so overall for me, Beach House was the best dining experience because of that view, the service and the quality of the food, and it came to £14, and that was the fact that we went for a steak as well. If I'd gone for something else as a main, it would cost me £7 that meal, which I just can't quite get my head round. So that is my review of everywhere that we ate at. As you can see, we didn't eat at either of the like 2 traditional MDRs. It's just the way it worked out. With the deal we had on our cruise, we had so much onboard spending, so we did make use of that a little extra dining because we wanted to use our onboard spend. But we had a great time, and as I said, if I had to narrow it down to top 3, Beach House is definitely number 1 for me, for sure. Probably Keel and Cow comes in at number 2, and then number 3 for me is probably, I'm gonna go Glass House. Really, really enjoyed it there as well. So let me know in the comments below, where's your favourite place to dine on Arvia? What would your tips be? And what kind of recommendations would you say to people to try food-wise? Do let me know. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time, see you later.